Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Azure Infrastructure Update. It's the 20th of January and Born to be Bad. Name that movie. As always, I have the chapters so you can jump to any particular update. New videos this week. I created a video all about networking. So this is, I kind of think, part 6 of the Azure Masterclass V2. Dives into all of the key elements related to networking Azure, connectivity to Azure. And then as a bit of fun, I created a video on how DNS works. How did you actually get to YouTube to watch this video? So I go through all of the actual steps and the components involved. Bit of fun, I thought it was interesting to do, so I walk through all of that in that video. On to compute. So Container Insights for Hybrid AKS is available in preview. So if I think about Hybrid AKS is where I have something like Azure Stack HCI, which is, hey, in my data center, I have either equipment that meets certain requirements or I've purchased a turnkey solution. It's running Azure Stack Hyperconverged Infrastructure HCI solution. So it's Hyper-V, it's storage spaces direct, it's got Windows Admin Center, a whole bunch of software-defined networking technologies. But what I can do on top of that is bring AKS, so I can have a managed Kubernetes environment. Well, now that hybrid AKS environment running on my Azure Stack HCI, I get Container Insights. So those curated set of metrics, of logs that I care about, giving me things like node performance, pod performance, bottlenecks, alerts that I might want, and much more. I now get those same set of capabilities that I expect to see on AKS in Azure, but now I also see it on my hybrid AKS. Virtual Machine Scale Set App Health Extension now has some rich health states. So think about a virtual machine scale set. One of the key parts is we're constantly adding instances and we're removing instances. We scale horizontally. Well, as part of virtual machine scale sets, I get other capabilities. I can do things like rolling OS upgrades. So it will, maybe 1 or 2 instances at a time, upgrade the underlying image as a new version is available. Maybe it's things like VM guest patching. Maybe it's instance repair. And it's important for all of those things that I understand the health of a particular instance. And I might actually care about the health of the application running inside it. And so what the App Health Extension does is rather than just caring about the Azure Resource VM, it can do a TCP or HTTP, basically probe, and get a response back from your application. Now there's 2 types of this rich health state. So I'll actually just jump over to it quickly, if it will let me do that. And so what this will let me do is there's a basic type. So there's a binary where it's either healthy or unhealthy. That's not going to work today for some reason. Let's just try that one more time. It's healthy or unhealthy. And then from that, okay, that's not going to work. You know, people always ask me, do I edit videos off or not? But sometimes our stuff is just broke, so I have to edit it. So anyway, there's 2 types. There's binary and then there's this rich. So the whole point is with binary, it's healthy or it's unhealthy. That's all I can do. But when I do the rich health states, the thing it adds is, sure, we have healthy and unhealthy, but we also add this idea of initializing an unknown. So initializing could be, well, when it creates that new instance, obviously it might take a period of time to warm up and actually be useful. And so I could give it a little bit more leeway. I can also create my own custom rules as part of the probe, providing it's using HTTP, so that I could get more than just healthy or unhealthy. I can have that unknown and maybe take different actions upon it. So I just get those additional health states. I get that grace period capabilities. The rich health is currently in preview, but the basic, the binary, hey, that I can go and use now. So again, this is designed to give me more insight into not just the Azure resource, but actually the app running inside and what is its status based on some probe I'm going to configure to go and get a response. On the database side, so Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server now has its configuration surfaced up to Azure. So if I think about the idea that, okay, I have SQL Server and it's running on some Arc-enabled server instance. So that's a Windows or Linux operating system that's been Arc-enabled. So it's got the connected machine agent on it. It's being managed and communicating with Azure. And then have SQL Server running on that operating system. Well, I can add an extra extension. So I get this Azure extension for SQL Server that builds on top of the regular connected machine agent. Well, now that SQL Server will get connected and surfaced up into Azure. I can even query it with things like the Azure Resource Graph. It's a special Azure Arc Data type of resource. And that's going to give me information about the encryption on that SQL box. It's going to give me information about the SQL version. It's going to give me information about the compatibility version. And I can even go to, hey, SQL Server Databases, Azure Arc within the portal and get information about them. So it's really just helping me surface up those SQL Server instances running on my Arc-enabled server instance. SQL Server 2022 now has Azure AD authentication. So Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, SQL Server on Windows VMs in Azure already supported Azure AD authentication. So I can use those Azure AD security principles, service principles as part of the authentication and roles within SQL Server. Well, now this enables me to use those same Azure AD identities on SQL Server outside of Azure. Running on Windows, running on Linux, it doesn't matter. It's now just part of SQL Server 2022, and it can leverage that. And then almost the opposite of that, there's now for Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance, an AD connector. So Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance is where I have a Arc-enabled Kubernetes instance. So it's something running on premises or in another cloud, but it's CNCF Kubernetes compatible. Then I bring down that Azure Arc manageability, and then on top of that, I can layer down other types of service. One of those services is SQL MI Managed Instance. So it's this evergreen, managed from the cloud instance of SQL. But it's running on premises, and on premises, we have a lot of Active Directory. The old Active Directory domain services are our domain. So what I can now do is there's an Active Directory connector, an ADC, that I can leverage with that Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance. Now, there's two different modes for this. There's both a customer and a system managed mode. In a customer managed mode, I'm creating the account that the SQL MI will run as. I have to really just manage each instance of those. As I start to have more and more of them, it may become challenging to manage at scale. Or there's the system managed. With the system managed, I have to give a certain organizational unit and a certain principal that has permission to create identities within that OU, but then it will automatically create the service principal for each SQL MI instance I create, and any rotation of key tab files that's leveraged as part of this connector as well. So that is now GA. And there's also a MySQL Flexible. Remember, Flexible is the new VM base. I can use burstable VMs. I can stop and start. I can have optional high availability. I can tweak all the configuration options. Well, now there's a connector for Power Automate and Logic Apps. Power Automate, Logic Apps provide that nice drag and drop, low to no code experience to create workflows of things I want to happen. And I can integrate with other services through connectors. Well, now there's a MySQL Flexible connector within those Logic Apps, within those Power Automate workflows I create. So now very easily, I could go and list data from MySQL. I could update records, I could add records, I could delete records, all within my nice drag and drop experience. So I don't have to really understand a lot of coding. I'm just going to be able to leverage that connector. And then miscellaneous, Azure Active Directory and IPv6. So IPv6 obviously is getting much more mainstream. Azure AD is starting to get more and more friendly with IPv6. Now this is going to build over time the implications for me. But a big implication for me right now is if I'm using named locations, and I'm using named locations based on IPv4 address ranges. So if I jump over super quickly, there's different ways I can define named locations in Active Directory. But if I was using, I'll just use the regular Azure portal, not the Entra portal, just for the sake of time because I'm already in here. But if I go to security and my conditional access, you see I've got named locations. And there's different ways I can configure those. I can configure them also based on GPS coordinates now. I can configure them based on location based, but I can also just define my own IP ranges. And you'll notice it's even telling me, hey, look, IPv6 is coming, update named locations today. So if in your environment you are using IPv6 and you are using named locations, i.e. specific sets of public-facing IP ranges to control access, I need to update my IP ranges to not only have your IPv4 range, you need to go ahead and add the IPv6 ranges you may have as well. So that's really the only action you need to be taking today. But you do want to be thinking about realizing, hey, IPv6 is becoming more and more mainstream. And today, if I'm using those named locations and I'm expecting, hey, traffic to be coming from IPv6, well then I need to start adjusting those named locations to accept those. And that was it. I hope that was useful. Until next video, take care.